Today we're going to look at factor by grouping. You've done awesome with factoring so far. This is just one more and the final way that we're going to learn how to graph. This one is different because if you'll look at the example that I have here, it's going to be something that has 4 separate terms. And that's the first time we've had that many terms to deal with. If you have 4 terms, you're going to group them into 2 separate terms. So you can see here that I've taken this and I look at this one part, I'm splitting it right down the middle. This plus sign has to go with this 7, and so then I've got this going on here. And what I'm going to do when I factor by grouping is I'm going to kind of go back to when we did GCFs. I'm going to look at these 2 terms here and look for the GCF. So when I look at it, as far as the 2 and the 10, I know that I could have a 2 factor out, and both terms have a W. So you can see down here that I've factored out the 2W. When I factor 2W out of this, all that's left is this x. Factor a 2W out of this, I get a plus 5. Now I'm going to come over to this other side and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to look here and say, what's the GCF between these 2 terms? And when I look at it, I think it's just going to be the 7. That's all that's going to come out. So I pull the 7 out. Notice that this plus sign goes right here in front of the 7. And then when I divide this by 7, I get x. Divide this by 7, I get 5. And now I'm at this stage here. Now if you look at this, by doing this factor by grouping, I've managed to take this part here, and do you see that it has an x plus 5? And do you see that this over here also has an x plus 5? Well, if both of these big terms, and I kind of am still separating this, I'm looking at it like this is one of the terms and this is the other term, and they both have an x plus 5. I'm going to pull out the GCF of x plus 5. Since they both have an x plus 5, I'm going to pull that out in front right here, and then I write what is left. This still has the 2W, so I write it here. This has a plus 7, I write it right here. And that's the binomial, and that's your final factorization right here. Okay, let's give it a shot. Okay, looking at this polynomial, this first one, I'm going to split it right down the middle like this. Remember that you keep that plus sign on the right side because it attaches to the 2. I'm going to look at these first 2 terms and decide what's my GCF between these 2 terms. All right, it looks like it'd be a 3, could go into both of those. And remember, when you pull out the GCF, you pull out whichever exponent is the lowest, so this is an n squared, so I could pull out an n squared on both of these. My GCF then is 3 n squared. In parentheses, then I'm going to write what's left. So in that first term, I'd have an n minus, and this would be a 4. Okay, now we do it all over again with the other side. We come over here and we look at what is the GCF between these 2. Looks like it's just going to be a 2. This plus sign comes straight down, put that plus sign there, and then factor out your 2, and it would look like I'll have an n minus 4 left. Remember the last time that we did this, we ended up with these 2 factors that were identical? Hey, looky, it happened again. So we're going to take that n minus 4 and we pull it out in front. And then I write in parentheses everything that is left. So over here on this term, I've got the 3n squared, and here I have the plus 2. That will be my second parenthesis set, 3n squared plus 2. Why don't you see if you can do this next one? Draw a line right down the middle, leaving the plus sign with the 20, and then do your GCF on each of those. Go ahead and pause the video now, and you work through this one on your own. No, really, you have to pause the video to finish it out. Okay, let's check and see how you did. This is what I got when I factored out my GCFs. Now, you may start to wonder, is this always going to happen where these match up? Well, it doesn't have to always happen that way, but the problems I'm giving you are going to always happen that way. That's how we know that we've done it right. If these don't match for you, then something's up, and you need to go back and check your work. So once you get these to match, then you write that matching quantity. So it's going to be a 4t plus 7 in parentheses. And then my leftover stuff was a 2t squared. Remember to put this plus sign here so that you don't forget it's a plus 5. Let's look at a similar problem, but one that has a sign here that is no longer a plus sign, but it's a minus sign. That's a big deal when that's a minus sign because it changes a little bit on how we approach this problem. If you'll look and see how I've grouped this, I've gone ahead and I've grouped these two terms together, these first two, and you can see that I've got that put right here. But this minus sign, I really need this to say plus right here. This minus sign is only subtracting the 10. If I make it a minus sign right here, it's going to subtract both of these quantities. And I don't want it to subtract both of them. I would only want it to subtract the 10. And because of that, I am going to always change, if this is a minus sign, right here, if this is a minus sign, I am always going to change it to, and I really would do it right here at this stage, I would change it to plus a negative 10. And then when I come down here and write it, I'm going to put my plus sign here in the middle. And then when I do my parentheses, you can see that I've now put a negative 10x. And the plus 50 is still a plus 50 because that's what I need it to be. That's what the original said. All I'm doing is changing. So I got a clutter of stuff here. Let me get rid of all this stuff. Well, I can only get rid of some of it. But right here, if this is a minus sign, you immediately change it to plus a negative and then do it like you have all the others. So on this one, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to look at what my common factor is to pull out of this first term. Looks like it's going to be an x squared. And then I would have an x minus 5 left. And then I always want this to say plus. This next thing I'm going to pull out. Now I could pull out a 10. But if I pull out a 10, I'm going to do this over on the side because this is not going to be what I want to do. If I pull out the 10, I'm going to have a negative x plus 5. Remember what we talked about, that these two should always match, and an x minus 5 is not the same thing as a negative x plus 5. These are the wrong signs. I wanted my x to be positive and my 5 to be negative. So right here, when I'm trying to decide what to factor out, and I said 10, it's not going to be a 10. I want to factor out a negative 10. So I'm going to pull out a negative 10. That's going to leave my first term a positive x. And then when I take 50 and divide it by negative 10, it'll actually end up being a negative 5. And now my parenthesis sets match. Once they match, I write them. And then I write the leftover. And this is going to be x squared. And right here what I have going on is plus a negative. We're kind of past the point of writing plus a negative. We just go ahead and call it minus. And then that's your final answer. Let's practice that one more time. So you can see right here, it's the very middle term that I'm concerned about, this very middle sign. And it's a minus. So I'm immediately going to change that, and it's going to be plus a negative y. And then I'll do my parentheses there and my parentheses there, and keep it as a plus sign in the middle. Now, let's factor out the GCF. Looks like I've got a 3y squared. And then in parentheses, I would just have the y left minus 2, looks like. Plus, over here on this side, I got that negative going again. And if you look ahead, think about what you want it to do. You want it to match this right here. So what I'm going to do, well, if you really look at the two terms, there's not really a GCF among them. But since I do want that to be positive, and I want the y to be positive and the 2 to be negative, and that's wrong here, what I can factor out is a negative 1. Now, if there is nothing to factor out at all, not even a negative to factor out, then you would just factor out 1, because you need something to sit here in this spot. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1 here. Sometimes you'll have to factor out a positive 1. When I factor out the negative 1, it'll change my y to positive y, and my plus 2 will turn into a minus 2. So now my quantities match, y minus 2, and in parentheses, 3y squared. And instead of a plus a negative 1, I'll just write it as a minus 1. And there's my factorization. All right, here is our last example. When you look at this one, I'm being nice. It's just a plus sign here, so we don't have to worry about changing that to plus and negative. I'm just going to split it right down the middle. Let's group those first 2 terms together, right there. And then we'll group the second 2 terms. Important to leave the plus sign in between there. Pull out your GCF on this. Looks like it's going to be x squared. And then I would have a 2x minus 5 left in those parentheses. Put your plus sign here. Now you do the GCF on this next part. So that's going to be looks like a 4 that I'm going to factor out. X minus 5. Oops, 2x minus 5. And then you write your 2x minus 5 because they match, and you write your leftover, x squared plus 4. All right, what you think? Can you do this? All right, it's pretty much the same thing over and over, unless there's that minus sign. You just be careful about your minus sign, and then you are going to be golden. Good luck.